Roger Waters and Richard Wright's simmering animosity persisted for a long time, and fans were left to wonder what had transpired. It was like observing a soap opera unfolding beneath the surface of Pink Floyd's iconic and mind-blowing music in concerts. Roger Waters now speaks out about the mysterious and intriguing relationship that lies behind many of their famous songs, shedding light on a complex chapter in rock history. So, who's at fault? Wright or Waters? If you thought you knew the whole backstory of one of the best bands of all time, you might be surprised. Pink Floyd was the undisputed kings of rock and roll in 1979. They were in the midst of recording what would become one of the most renowned concept albums of all time, The Wall, an ambitious album. The band's energy wasn't exactly harmonized, even though the music was revolutionary. Feuds that would make a Thanksgiving meal quarrel seem mild, creative conflicts, power struggles, and double checks. The two main characters in this drama were Richard Wright and Roger Waters. Richard, the shy genius whose keyboard wizardry gave Pink Floyd its distinctive ethereal sound, contrasted with Roger, the band's blazing singer with a no-holds-barred commitment to invention. They were rather similar to oil and water, you might say. Perhaps it's more analogous to the combination of two excellent yet disastrous drinks, say, coffee and orange juice. In retrospect, Roger Waters has spoken publicly about those difficult times. Also, it wasn't exactly a handshake and hug fest. The rift that developed between him and Wright went beyond their shared musical interests and ultimately affected Pink Floyd's legacy. But hey, a rock band wouldn't be complete without some mayhem, would it? However, at the beginning, they relied heavily on one another. When it came to creating Pink Floyd's otherworldly, experimental sound, Wright was unstoppable. Instrumental masterpieces like The Great Gig in the Sky and Us and Them featured his mesmerizing piano wizardry. That man was so talented, you'd assume he had a portal to another world. Not only did albums like Wish You Were Here and The Dark Side of the Moon sell millions of copies, they became cultural icons. A significant portion of the achievement was because of Wright's talent for creating music that evoked a sense of weightlessness in space. However, a change began to occur in the mid-1970s. Roger Waters was doing more than simply directing the ship, he was essentially constructing it, plotting its trajectory, and encouraging his crew to row harder. Although his singular emphasis on Pink Floyd's music was beneficial to the band's sound, it had the opposite effect on morale. Because he was a quiet, contemplative man, Wright didn't quite fit in with Roger's My Way or the Highway ethos. Their relationship was already showing signs of strain when they released Animals in 1977. As time went on, Wright's contributions were marginalized, and the animosity between him and Waters was as muted as a peaceful neighborhood at 3 in the morning. For Waters, control was more than a passing fancy, it was his life's work. As he became more involved in the creative process, Wright's role began to diminish. Worse yet, Wright's reserved demeanor and unwillingness to speak out created an uncomfortable situation, similar to a group project buddy who performs their share but doesn't say anything when someone else steals the spotlight. Wright found the presence of Water to be more than simply an annoyance, it was as if someone else were to persistently take all the air in the room. Their tensions had already begun to boil by the time the band began working on The Wall. Waters intended to do a lot with The Wall. A profound exploration of loneliness, estrangement, and psychological anguish was what he had in mind. That would be a lot of fun. Like everyone else, he expected perfection from everyone else. Wright, who was already dealing with mental health concerns and a lack of self-confidence, found it extremely challenging, like attempting to run a marathon while injured. Never one to skirt the issue, criticized Wright for failing to do his share and said that his efforts were insufficient. As the tensions rose, the other members of the band stepped in to act as referees, but their intervention was ultimately ineffective. The deciding "it's him or me" card was later dropped by Waters. If Wright stayed, The Wall would never have been built. When faced with mounting pressure, Wright reluctantly decided to resign as a full-time member. And performances, although in the role of session musician exclusively. It was like being demoted from quarterback to waterboy for someone who had been such an integral part of the band. Not only was it embarrassing for his career, but it also deeply affected him on a personal level. The band became Waters' creative playground as he tightened his hold on Pink Floyd. Following his departure, Wright attempted a solo album, Wet Dream. Though it was filled with his own musical approach, it failed to ignite the charts. Sales were, well, not spectacular, and critical reception was lackluster. The CD is like a small party where nobody stayed late and everyone went early. For Wright, who was already experiencing poor spirits, this was an additional setback to his self-assurance. Despite Pink Floyd continuing without Wright, the void he created was palpable. The final cut, released in 1983, featured Roger Waters performing alone with backing musicians. Dark and gloomy, it lacked the otherworldly energy that Wright had usually contributed. The band appeared intent on putting its unresolved drama in the background, despite the fact that fans and critics were not thrilled, complaining that the magic wasn't there. In Wright's case, things didn't exactly get easier. Their marriage crumbled. And drug misuse became an issue for him. He felt disoriented after becoming famous and then being kicked out of the band he helped form. Even though he had a hand in building the club, he was booted out and left to watch the other patrons enjoy themselves. He battled loneliness and his own issues for a long time while he tried to find his feet. As early as 1985, Richard Wright resembled the youngster who sat on the bench and watched his buddies play. He was no longer a part of Pink Floyd. Following his conflicts with David Gilmour and Nick Mason, Roger Waters made the shocking decision to resign. It resembled a sibling rivalry in which the most outspoken sibling takes the lead. After Waters left, Gilmour became the de facto head after a period of instability. Do you know what Gilmour did next? He returned Wright's call. However, Wright was not immediately reinstated as a full member. In Pink Floyd's words, "Let's see how this goes," he came back as a session musician. Although it lacks the comfort of a hug, any improvement is welcome. Wright promptly reaffirmed his importance as they dealt with a brief loss of rationality. Songs like Learning to Fly and Sorrow sounded much better with his keyboard work. True Pink Floyd, the audience began to say. Wright was obviously more than just a supporting player. A headliner, he was. Even if things with Waters remained uncomfortable, Wright's relationships with Gilmour and Mason started to mend. Just picture yourself running into a former flame at a social event. Even Waters, in his signature obstinate fashion, conceded that Wright had played a significant role in Pink Floyd's enchantment. Similar to receiving an accolade without remembering to express gratitude to those who supported you, Wright experienced a mix of emotions during this moment. It didn't matter, he was back at home. Stop and re-evaluate your assumptions if you believe Waters had a problem with anyone other than Wright. We should discuss Roger before getting into the drama. A tale unfolds via Roger's quest. The birth of Roger, the younger of two brothers, took place in 1943 at Great Bookham, Surrey. His father, Eric Fletcher Waters, was an educator, a communist, and a devoted Christian. Initially, Eric was a World War II pacifist and drove an ambulance throughout the Blitz. However, he did enlist at some point and sadly died in battle at the age of 5 months, when Roger was still a baby. Both Roger's life and music were impacted by the loss. War and loss are prevalent themes throughout his Pink Floyd work. It hits you even harder when you hear the backstory. Mary, Roger's mother, relocated the family to Cambridge after Eric passed away and brought up her 2 sons on her own. In Roger's first recollection, the VJ Day festivities heralded the conclusion of World War II. Even at a young age, he was already coping with the weight of certain harsh truths regarding the effects of war. As a kid, Roger attended the all-boys Morley Memorial Junior School and Cambridge High. He crossed paths with Syd Barrett, who would go on to become the original lead singer of Pink Floyd, at this event. David Gilmour, too? He attended a separate school, albeit he lives nearby. Before anybody could even fathom it, the Cosmos was orchestrating the most epic rock band reunion ever. The 15-year-old Roger was already causing a stir. He took on the role of chairman and poster designer for the Cambridge Youth Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Campaigner Roger was, in all honesty, getting warmed up. Although he was successful in sports and activism, his greatest achievements were in cricket and rugby. School wasn't exactly his cup of tea. In his words, it was repressive. Claims that the instructors acted as bullies. To be honest, he didn't care much for it other than the sports. Roger traveled to London in 1962 to enroll in Regent Street Polytechnic, an architectural school. Designs for aspiring rock stars' homes? There was a huge turn in the story. Based on his aptitude testing, it seemed like he would excel in it. Before deciding on architecture, he even thought about mechanical engineering. He formed a trio with Nick Mason and Richard Wright, whom he met at school. Became close companions. Roger and Nick decided to abandon their academic pursuits and devote themselves full-time to music in 1963. Once they settled into their shared apartment, they began performing music with Richard. When several members of the band departed, they replaced them with Syd Barrett and Bob Close. They continued performing at private parties under the name Sigma 6. The band experimented with several names after Roger moved to bass. The Abdabs, the T-Set, and Leonard's Lodgers. A tea service. After much deliberation, they decided on Pink Floyd in 1966, taking cues from the work of blues artists Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. Pink Floyd was tearing it up in 1967, spearheaded by Syd Barrett. One of the best albums of all time was their first, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Unfortunately, Syd's deteriorating mental state and increasingly unpredictable conduct rendered his continued endeavors futile. The band made the difficult choice to cut ties with him in 1968. Even though it hurt, they had to keep going. A new manager and a fresh outlook marked the beginning of a new era for Pink Floyd. They did more than survive, history reveals that they flourished. From there, it was all rock lore. Syd Barrett's 1968 departure from Pink Floyd put the band in a difficult position. Someone had to come up and fill the enormous creative void. Barrett departed. David Gilmour then entered the scene. Abilities to blend in with the mayhem, a voice like an angel's, and silky guitar playing. However, let's be honest. Roger Waters took the wheel and didn't merely take over, while Gilmour maintained the musical tempo. The ball went flying out of his grasp. As Pink Floyd followed Waters into his realm of profound political and philosophical ideas, he became the tyrannical older brother of the band. Waters had more important matters to attend to than Barrett's wacky, psychedelic sensations. He went so far as to collaborate with Ron Geesin in 1970 on the soundtrack for Music from the Body, which featured real bodily sounds. Yes, your rumbling tummy might have been included on the record. It demonstrated that Waters was not hesitant to experiment or offend people. It was also strange and crazy. Waters took over as showrunner in the mid-70s. He composed the majority of the songs, contributed to the song's lyrics and sang with Gilmour and Richard Wright on stage. In 1973, The Dark Side of the Moon was released, and it was a huge bomb. For an absurd 736 weeks, it remained on the Billboard charts. The Math Challenge took 14 years. More than 40 million copies have been sold, and it continues to sell thousands of units every week. After playing it for his wife and seeing her cry, Waters likely felt he had nailed it. He was extremely proud of himself. The music of Pink Floyd was infused with Waters' emotions and struggles with his father. His father's death in World War II affected him deeply, and he wrote songs about the price of war, loss, and life's injustices. The question of why the world is so chaotic recurs throughout his music, from songs like Corporal Plague to the finished product. As the music swelled, we couldn't help but think, wow, this is really profound. Afterwards, The Wall appeared. In the same way that Dark Side of the Moon changed the game, The Wall dropped the mic. The 1979 release was influenced by Waters' personal battles with feelings of loneliness, abandonment, and a strong need to express her solitude. Not only was the CD a smashing success, but the live performances were absolutely electric. During the performance, they constructed a stage wall and then dismantled it. Little, huh? It was 1981's final wall concert that marked the end of Waters' Pink Floyd collaboration until Live Aid in 2005. When they dropped the final mix in 1983, tensions were high. To Waters, Gilmour and the others were more like unpaid interns, and he was running Pink Floyd solo. The record was essentially Waters' solo effort, what with all the political jabs and gloomy themes. Gilmour even requested additional time to compose music, but Waters made a move reminiscent of My Way or The Highway. Because of how violently they fought, Gilmour's name was omitted from the list of producers. Waters finally called it quits in 1985. He then threw up his hands and departed, describing Pink Floyd as a spent force. Oh no, Gilmour and Nick Mason weren't prepared to give up just yet. Despite their best efforts, Waters attempted to stifle any mention of the Pink Floyd name. To the point where they are like Paul and Ringo without John, playing as the Beatles. In 1987, they finally settled their differences after years of fighting. The band proceeded with Gilmour and Mason, while Waters held the wall and that famous inflatable pig in his hands. Then there's the heartwarming reunion from 2005's Live 8. During their 23-minute concert, Waters, Gilmour, Mason, and Wright performed hits such as Comfortably Numb and Wish You Were Here. It proved that even vengeful rock icons can set aside their pride for 2 hours and 33 minutes, and it was epic and moving. Waters dove headfirst into solo work after departing Pink Floyd. The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, released in 1984, was his debut album. It was an eccentric and reflective look at love and independence. Guitar virtuoso Eric was even a part of it. Thoughts on whether Waters had lost control varied from person to person. He went on a tour with the record, incorporating new music with Pink Floyd's legacy. However, he may have contemplated hitchhiking due to the poor sales of tickets. But in the end, the record was a smashing success. Roger Waters' impact on Pink Floyd and music history cannot be denied, regardless of your feelings towards him. Would their drama have kept us from discussing them today, if we were to be honest? I highly doubt it. Next, in 1986, Roger Waters realized that doing music wasn't fulfilling enough, so he ventured into film. He contributed his voice to the animated feature When the Wind Blows, which follows a lovely elderly couple as they endure the aftermath of a nuclear holocaust. It sounds uplifting, doesn't it? For the score, he assembled the upbeat band the Bleeding Heart Band. Radio KOS, Waters' second solo album, was released in 1987. It recounted the wacky tale of Billy, a mute man from a failing mining village in Wales who, for some reason, picks up radio waves in his head. Billy's adventure? The plot consisted of the usual suspects, a radio DJ, a nuclear attack hoax, and packing computers all across the world. Waters embarked on a tour after the album's release, transforming Radio KAOS into an extravagant live performance. In the vicinity of Potsdamer Platz and the Brandenburg Gate, he performed one of his most spectacular concerts. While 1 billion people enjoyed it on television, 200,000 were there in person, jamming out. It's respectable considering he was effectively hosting a massive charity event. Even with the lineup, Waters wasn't sparing. Famous musicians like the Scorpions, Van Morrison, Cyndi Lauper, and Joni Mitchell were among those he summoned. In addition to Sinead O'Connor and the East German Symphony Orchestra, a Soviet marching band, and real US military helicopters, as if that weren't enough, he tossed in the rest. Go big or go home couldn't have been more appropriate. The show was a smashing success despite the absence of a few of his former Pink Floyd bandmates. A platinum-certified double album of the show was also released by Waters. With the March 2007 appearance of Roger Waters' song Hello, I Love You in the science fiction film The Last Mimsy, the musician got his first taste of Hollywood. He said the song was a wonderful compliment to the film's themes of virtue and purity. All the feels-inducing heavy philosophical things, basically. Waters performed at the world-renowned Coachella Festival in California a year later, in 2008. Live Earth in Mumbai was also planned to have him as the headliner. Unfortunately, the concert had to be cancelled due to the terrorist assaults in the city. Although it may not have been their intended tone, Waters showed no signs of slowing down. By 2013, the money he made from his The Wall live tour had surpassed that of any solo artist's tour. Additionally, he contributed to the 2012 Hurricane Sandy Relief Fund. Reason being, when you're Roger Waters, you rock for good causes as hard as you rock for heavy rock. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Waters' first solo album in nearly 25 years, titled Is This the Life We Want?, was published. In the year 2017. Nigel Godrich, who did wonders for Radiohead, returned to his roots as a producer with this album, reviving the iconic Waters sound. He went on tour that same year as part of the S Plus Them tour, performing a medley of Pink Floyd hits and solo work, engaging listeners intellectually while they rock out. In terms of his creative output, Roger was still at the forefront. For a special performance, he even joined Nick Mason's band, and he provided the voice for an adaptation of The Soldier's Tale by Igor Stravinsky. In 2020, the little global pandemic pushed back the release of Roger's This Is Not a Drill tour, as it did with most things. It was originally scheduled to end in 2020, right before the presidential election, but the tour was postponed until 2022. It was an instant sensation in North America once it began. Naturally, that wasn't the end of it. He decided to expand it to Europe in 2023. However, the tour was much more than just music. Roger utilized it to provide some profound social and political criticism. As the rest of the world resorted to sourdough bread and Netflix binges throughout the pandemic, Waters diligently worked on his autobiography. Also, in December of 2022, he shocked listeners with an extended play, EP, called The Lockdown Sessions. It featured new renditions of his beloved solo and Pink Floyd tracks. In 2023, though, for the album's 50th anniversary, Roger released a revamped version of Dark Side of the Moon, which was the true treat. The Dark Side of the Moon remix is the updated version that features spoken word segments and does away with the guitar solos. Just like the original, but with a little more Roger Waters wisdom thrown in. In October 2023, he performed 2 exclusive gigs at the London Palladium with this rendition. It wasn't your average concert. They provided Waters with a platform to discuss Julian Assange's condition and read excerpts from his unpublished memoir. Concert, lecture, and therapy all rolled into one. As a result, Roger Waters is far from done with his music and ideas. He is still rocking, dreaming big, and keeping us all guessing. This man is clearly not going anywhere. The truth is, he most likely will never.